Good morning, Year 6. In this session, we're going to be reading a story together. You will need a piece of paper and a pencil in order to do this activity, so if you don't have those items, just pause the video and rush and get them now. The story that we're going to read together is called Clever Rachel. Throughout the lesson, I'm going to be reading you the story, and as we go through, there are going to be 4 smaller reflection questions. You should write down your answers on a piece of paper and you can just number them 1 to 4. At the end of the story, there will be a larger reflection activity which should be written on your piece of paper, and then all of your reflections should be uploaded onto Seesaw. Right, let's get started with our story. Every child is special. Some children are beautiful, some are talented, some are strong, and some are kind. Usually it takes a while to discover what gift God has given a child. But this story is about a girl whose special gift was clear to everyone from the day she was born. This girl was called Rachel. Even when she was a baby, her mother noticed how clever Rachel was. One morning, she came to take the baby out of her crib, and she saw that Rachel had lined up her alphabet blocks to make the words cat and dog and box and bin, all standing at the end of her crib. "Oh, what a clever little girl you are," her mother exclaimed. She went downstairs to tell her husband, who opened the inn in their small town. "Nonsense," Rachel's father replied. "It's just a coincidence. The blocks must have just landed that way, just by chance." He could scarcely believe they had given birth to such a bright child. Here's your first question. What character from a children's book does Rachel sound like so far? I know a character from a book that I really loved as a child. It's actually been turned into a film as well, and it sounds exactly like the girl from this story. If you know it, write it down for number 1. When Rachel started school, her teacher saw straight away that the little girl was extraordinarily clever. She wrote in Rachel's first report card, "Rachel is by far the most intelligent child I have ever taught. I have no doubt that she will do great things in the years to come." Rachel's father read the report and turned to his wife. "I know that God has given our daughter the gift of a very fine mind," he said. "But what really matters in life is not how clever you are, but how kind. We must make sure she grows up to be kind and thoughtful too. She must always remember to help people who are in need." Rachel's mother nodded in agreement, and she and her husband were both very good people, and their inn was a place of warmth and hospitality to everyone who visited it, so it was not difficult for them to show their daughter how to be kind. As Rachel grew up, she learnt to look after strangers who stopped at their inn for the night. She learned to notice when they were sick or when elderly visitors were tired and needed special care. She always made sure children felt safe and had everything they wanted. Everyone who visited the inn appreciated Rachel's special gifts, and everyone who lived in the town knew how lucky they were to have someone so kind and so clever living among them. One day, a messenger from the king came to the small town, the hooves of his horse clattering over the cobbles as he passed through. Drawing to a halt, the messenger jumped from his horse and read out the king's decree. "His Royal Highness the King has decided to marry the cleverest woman in the land. Any unmarried young woman who is especially clever should make herself known to me at once," he announced. Immediately, Rachel's parents understood why God had given Rachel such special gifts. She was to become a queen. They told the messenger that their daughter was exceptionally clever and then brought her before him. "By order of the king, I have 3 questions to test how clever you are," the messenger said. "What is the fastest thing? What is the richest thing? And what is the dearest thing?" So, that's your second reflection question. How would you answer this? Pause the video here and think to yourself, what's the fastest thing? What's the richest thing? And what is the dearest thing? That should be your first reflection. So pause the video and write down those ideas. Sorry, your second reflection. Pause the video and write down those ideas. Okay, let's find out how Rachel answered this question. Rachel answered in a flash. The fastest thing is thought. The richest thing is the earth, and the dearest thing is love. The messenger knew at once that he'd found the right woman. He galloped straight back to the palace and cried out to the king, "I have found her! I have found her! I have found you the cleverest woman in the land." But the king was not so sure, even when he heard Rachel's answers to his 3 questions. "I'd like to see this woman for myself," he said, "and I will give her a more difficult task so that we may find out if she really is as clever as she seems. If she is, then I shall marry her without delay." The messenger rode back to the town where Rachel lived and delivered the king's commands. "His Royal Highness orders you to appear at the palace in a week's time, neither walking nor riding, neither dressed nor undressed, and bringing a gift that is not a gift." When Rachel's parents heard this strange request, they begged her not to go. "Darling, how will you be able to answer this peculiar command?" said her mother. "And who knows what the king will do to you if you can't," muttered her father. But Rachel just smiled and told them not to worry. She collected the few things that she needed and set off for the palace. The king was waiting. He saw Rachel in the distance and walked out to meet her, and as she drew closer, he smiled. So far, so good. What do you think she's doing then? The king smiled, which means she must have done something right. This is reflection number 3. How could she arrive at the palace neither walking nor riding, neither dressed nor undressed, bringing a gift that is not a gift? Write down how you would have done this on number 3, please. Solve this riddle, and then we'll find out now how Rachel chose to solve the riddle. She was riding on a goat with one foot dragging on the ground. Very clever, he thought, neither riding nor walking. Then he looked to see how she was dressed and saw that she was wearing no clothes, but she had wrapped herself in a fishnet. I like this woman, he said to himself. Who else could have managed to achieve both dressed and not dressed? Let us see if she has a gift for me, which is not a gift. When Rachel arrived before the king, she looked into his eyes and saw that he was a kind man. She understood that these strange requests were because he was looking for a partner who was as clever as he was, and that he was tired of being lonely. Deciding that she wanted to marry him, she held out her gift to him. Hidden inside her cupped hands, "Your Highness," she murmured, "a gift for you." But as the king reached out to take the gift from Rachel, she opened her hands, and a dove slipped out from between them and flew into the branches of a nearby tree. The king saw that Rachel had brought him a gift, but it was not one that he could keep. As he watched the dove fly away, he smiled and held out his hand. "Will you marry me and be my queen?" he asked. "Yes, Your Highness, I will," replied Rachel. The king held Rachel's hand and looked into her eyes. "There is one condition," he went on. "I know now how clever you really are, but despite that you must never question any of my judgments." This seemed like a strange condition for the marriage, but Rachel agreed, and the wedding took place soon after. Rachel and the king lived happily together for quite some time. One day, however, she was out walking in the woods when she saw a poor man sitting beside the forest track weeping. "What is the matter?" she asked. The man knew this was the queen and grew afraid, but Rachel's kind eyes and gentle voice encouraged him to answer. "My family has very little money," he began, "but we do have a horse, a mare. When she became pregnant, we were overjoyed. Now we might have a second horse that we could sell to buy food. But when the mare finally gave birth, she was lying underneath someone else's wagon. And so now the foal belongs to someone else. It belongs to someone else because it came from his wagon." Rachel was puzzled. She frowned. "What utter nonsense!" she exclaimed. "Who gave such a ridiculous ruling?" The man lowered his eyes. "It's the king's ruling, my lady," he said. "No one can challenge it." Rachel thought for a moment. "You are correct that no one can challenge the king's laws, but that doesn't mean that the king can't change his own mind. Meet me here tomorrow, listen carefully to what I tell you, and do everything I say." The next day, Rachel returned to the wood with a fishing rod. The poor man was waiting for her. She gave him the rod and told him to go and stand by the palace and cast the line through an open window so that the hook and line went through the window into the room beyond. He must stand there, she said, and pretend to be fishing. The poor man couldn't understand how this would change anything, but he did as Rachel instructed. He stood outside the palace with his fishing rod all morning until the king looked out and saw him. It was a ridiculous sight, a man fishing with his line hanging over the windowsill and trailing across the marble floor of the palace. "What on earth is this?" the king demanded. "I've never seen anything so silly in my life." The poor man shook in his boots at the king's anger, but he answered his question. "I am waiting for fish to come from your floor," he replied. "After all, a horse was born from someone else's wagon, making it his, not mine. And if that is the case, then any fish that jump from your floor onto my rod must be mine." The king knew at once what was going on and whose idea this must be. "Rachel!" he yelled. Only his wife could have dreamt up something like this and taught the poor man what to say. When the queen appeared, the king took her in his arms. "You agreed when we married that you would never question my rulings," he said sadly, "and now you have broken your promise, which was the condition of our marriage. You must now leave the palace forever. But because I love you so much, I will let you take one thing with you. Choose whatever is dearest to you and go." The king turned his back on Rachel so that she would not see his tears. He fled, and he fled. So, if you were in Rachel's situation, what is the one thing you would take with you? Remember, she's very clever, and she loves the king, and she is the queen, she lives in a palace. What is the one thing you think she's going to take, or what is the one thing you would take? Or you could answer both questions. What's the one thing you would take with you if you're going to only want to take one thing? And what do you think clever Rachel will take with her? Right, let's keep on going through the story then. He fled to his rooms and did not come down for the rest of the day, as he could not bear to see his beloved wife go. Rachel did not leave straight away, however. As usual, she was thinking. As night fell and the king slipped into a deep sleep, Rachel sneaked into his bedchamber and wrapped him in a blanket. 2 servants then carefully lifted their master from his bed and carried him from the room, gently setting him in a carriage next to the queen. When the king awoke the next morning, he looked up and saw the trees of the forest above him and his wife sitting next to him. "Darling Rachel," he exclaimed, "I thought I would never see you again. But where are we? And what am I doing here? Have you disobeyed me yet again?" Rachel looked deep into his eyes. "I did not mean to disobey you the first time, and I most certainly have not done so again. You said I could take my dearest possession with me when I left the palace, and that is exactly what I have done. You, my darling, are the thing that is most dear to me. I can live without the palace, and I can live without being queen, but I cannot live without you, so you are what I've chosen to take with me." At this point, the king understood how foolish he had been. "Come home with me, my dear one," he said, "and we will live together in the palace forever." When they arrived back at the palace, the king issued 3 decrees. The first was that the poor man should have his foal back. The second was to insist that the queen could and should overrule his judgments if he was ever wrong. And the third was to appoint Rachel as High Judge and Chancellor, because not only was she wise, but her kindness towards others and her understanding of the poor was the best in all the land. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that story. We're now going to do our main reflection. For this, I'd like you to write a short paragraph, maybe 3 or 4 sentences, telling me something you've learned from that story. So the main question is, what lessons can we learn from this story? What are we meant to learn from this story about Rachel and the king? There's some sentence starters here that you can use. For example, this story can teach us that, or from this story I learned. I think the moral of this story is, and there are many important lessons to be learned from this story, I learned that. So have a go at telling me what you think you can learn from this story, what you can learn from Rachel, and all of that. So once you've done that, please upload that work onto Seesaw. As well, if you enjoyed the story, I've got some ideas of some creative reflective activities that you could have a go at if you've got time left today. You could make a storyboard of the story. You could design your own front cover. You could write your own version of a similar story. You could draw a picture of clever Rachel, or you could have a go at writing your own riddles, just like the ones that the king did for clever Rachel. I hope you did enjoy the story, and please don't forget to upload your reflections onto Seesaw.